mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about episode 3 of the FXN Hulu original series Fleishman is in Trouble, entitled Free Pass. The episode title revolves around what this episode essentially tells us is the moment that broke Rachel and Toby's marriage. But first, let's talk about how we got there. This entire episode is a flashback that recalls how Toby and Rachel met, how their marriage progressed, and ultimately how they essentially grew apart. And I wasn't initially on board with this episode because I don't really need to see another relationship that starts out happy, as all relationships do, devolve into something where the two people hate each other. I've seen it 80 million times in various television shows and films. I didn't need to see it again, and I thought this show was going to do something a little bit more interesting with this relationship story, rather than tell this generic end of relationship kind of thing that's like, hey, here's how they were cool in the end, let's watch them grow apart. And I thought they'd do something a little bit cooler than that, and they did. So that's why I said I initially wasn't on board with this, but by the end of the episode, I found it to be really a really compelling episode that created a whole lot of interesting talking points that we're going to discuss over the course of this next 20 minutes or so. But this episode shows us a lot of interesting points in time where we can see these two failing to recognize or acknowledge signs that the other person might not be the most compatible partner for them. We also see more examples of their different worldviews. Toby's, I want to help people and I get paid for it, so it's a win-win. And Rachel's, I grew up broke, so I need to be financially secure, and you're not trying hard enough to take this seriously to make sure that I can afford all the shit that I want. And I found that stuff to be really compelling, their different worldviews and how they respond to each other's worldviews. So according to Libby, Rachel starts to ascend at her job, and Toby starts to feel neglected. But before I even really continue, I already want to take a brief pause and again point out that it's Libby telling us about Toby's experience, and which she'd obviously only likely hear from Toby. So of course, I'm gonna continue to not believe Libby, but just take her narration with a grain of salt, because it's gonna have that Toby told me this, and this is of course going to be colored with his personal resentment toward Rachel and presented in a way that's gonna make me side with him. So when I'm hearing when I'm hearing Libby say things like Rachel started to ascend at her job and Toby felt neglected and all this kind of stuff, I'm still thinking like, okay, this is what Toby is saying to Libby, not Libby's personal experiences. And I do still believe that at some point we are going to see a part of this story that's going to make Rachel look a little bit different. But I'm going to actually talk about that a little bit more toward the end. But we also see Rachel discover the person who made her a big player in the industry. I think Alejandra something or other. And ironically, I don't know, and I'm pretty sure this was intentional. Did anyone else think that suffrage thing that she was doing was really bad? like there's no way you watch that and think this person's gonna be a star. I watched that, I'm like, this person's gonna be a hack. Like that wasn't very good. But Rachel gets bitchier and bitchier toward Toby, and she's also really shitty to his friends. Like there's a really, man, I really did not like her in this scene. But there's a scene where they go to like a bar or something where Toby's friends are at, and Rachel drops on him in the moment that she doesn't want to be there long via oh man, we got somewhere to be. And Toby's like, where we got to be? She's like, you know the thing. And he has to realize like now, oh, she's trying to make an excuse for us to leave my friends early. And he goes along with it, which of course that's what you do when you're new to a relationship, right? You kind of kowtow to all of their demands and do anything that they want to keep them happy. And even worse, even though Libby clearly sees what's happening here and sees him kind of like knuckle under and just go like, yeah, sure, we got that thing. Rachel goes to the bathroom and comes back and makes it even worse by going, you know what? I thought we had to leave at 8, but we actually had to be there by 7, so we got to go right now. And it's such a shitty scene, man. And Rachel looks like such a shit in it. And, oh man, that scene just really upset me. But Eventually, Rachel gets pregnant for the first time with Hannah, who we know, and Toby becomes very attentive of her during this pregnancy, almost overly so, to the point where both me and Rachel, like as Rachel says it, I'm thinking it. I'm like, can you stop like treating her like a baby? Like he's even talking to her in a baby voice, like, "Are you okay? Do you want me to rub your feet, sweetie?" Like it's very, like he's talking down to her. It's very insulting, and it would be especially insulting to someone like Rachel. Like Rachel's not the kind of person that's gonna miss that talking down tone. She's not gonna miss that. But however, as I suspected we would, we do see some glimpses of Toby being not so great as well. Not to the degree that I expected or to the degree that I expect we are going to see further, but just enough to see his contributions to her worsening mindset. So when Rachel tells him being Toby, that her boss hit on her, Toby makes it all about himself. And of course he would, right? Because he doesn't fuck with anybody in that circle. He thinks they're all like uppity rich douchebags. So of course he's gonna take it as an affront on himself. Because he already holds these like he already holds this self-doubt because of how they talk down on his career, like it's not a good career, like they act like he's not a doctor. And so he's already got that kind of like hovering over his head, that chip on his shoulder about his career. So to find out that one of these people hit on his wife, he of course is gonna be like, "Oh, one of those fucking assholes," and to look at it as an affront on him, like, how dare he insult me by hitting on my wife, which is a very real feeling. I'd feel the same way. But in that moment, when you're being told about it and she's trying to open up to you, to pace back and forth and make it all about yourself is not going to reflect well. Like, even if that's how you feel in that moment, you need to be listening. And that's not what Toby was doing. But the most interesting thing we learn is that Rachel doesn't like going on long walks. And that sounds like really inconsequential and not a big deal. But I loved that. I loved finding that out, because even though that seems small, it's a huge deal. Like, so Libby's narration revealed early in the episode that Toby really likes these long walks, so he really valued being able to find somebody who was willing to go on these walks with him. So Rachel saying she's not into it isn't just showing that they're not compatible, like, oh, he likes long walks and she doesn't. It shows that she no longer cares enough to pretend. And that's what really, really hit me in that scene, because she was willing to spare his feelings, or at least willing to do something she didn't enjoy with him because she was into him, she loved him, and she wanted to be receptive to what he enjoys. When you reach that point where you're like, yeah, I don't even give a fuck how you feel about this, I don't want to do it anymore, that's probably a sign that the marriage is over, when you, or at least on its way to being over. Pretty big red flag that you no longer care about sparing your significant other's feelings. It's like, yeah, fuck it, I don't even care. I thought that was a big scene, and like I feel like it's gonna be overlooked a little bit, but I think that it says a lot when someone's behavior is to the point where, like, I'm not even gonna spare your feelings. I don't like that thing that you like. I hate it, and I don't want to do it anymore. That's big. And you know, she was willing to pretend that she liked it because she was so enamored with him. So it's like, now that she's not, she doesn't need to pretend. That was probably the biggest clue for me, that this was going in a different direction. Even prior to, well, not a different direction, the predictable direction, but that was the biggest clue. And that was like fairly early on. And when I say early on, I mean early on in the events that we see in this episode. You know, this episode presents the final scene as that moment, the one where you know, like, this is where they're fucked up. And Libby's narration even says it. But that moment with the long walks thing, that for me is what really kind of did it. But the biggest moment of this episode, though, is when Rachel gives birth to her daughter, Hannah, who we've met. And I love this episode from that point on. I mean, it was fine prior to that, but prior to that, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm just watching the devolving of a marriage, and I've seen that 8 million fucking times. I don't need to see that again. But when we get to the point with Rachel giving birth, that's where I think it takes a turn that becomes really, really interesting. So, there's a lot of compelling things that happen from that point on that I think can impact how you view their relationship. Like whether that's me being someone who is, I'm kind of inclined to side with Toby. Then I mentioned last week that I read an article that seemed very sympathetic to Rachel, and I'm going to talk about that at the end as well. But I feel like these moments after Rachel's starts to go into labor, these moments after that are really going to impact, I think, how people view not just their relationship, but how they feel about Rachel or how they feel about Toby. So when Rachel's being checked out in triage, a different doctor comes in than their personal doctor, the one who they expected to show up. And we see the typical, who is this? Where's my doctor? You've seen this. If you've seen a birthing scene in a movie, you've probably seen a doctor who's not their doctor show up to help give birth to the baby. And this guy says something like, she's like, you're not my doctor. And he says, I'm who you got. And I'm like, okay, immediately, I'm like, who the fuck are you talking to? That's my energy instantly. Like, this is not, like, it's almost implausible how shitty this doctor is. Like, your job is to help make this experience go as smoothly as you can for patients. What did you get into this business for if that's how you talk to people? Like, if I do that if I'm in that situation and a different doctor comes in and my wife goes, where's my doctor? You're not my doctor. He goes, I'm the one you got. Like, I might hit this motherfucker in that moment for being that disrespectful. And then later he says, like, are you going to have a baby? He says, are you going to be a baby or have one or something to that effect? And Toby says, that's not how you talk to a patient. And even in that moment, I was on, like, it's hard to get me on Rachel's side. I was on Rachel's side in that moment. Because again, my immediate reaction is, who the fuck are you talking to? Like just on the strength of that, show some respect. Like you understand as a doctor the situation that this woman is in. Even if she's saying things that upset you, you understand you as a doctor more than someone like me. You understand what this woman is going through in this pain. You might not understand it like I know what it feels like, but you understand, you've been across this, you know what this woman is dealing with. Even if she's giving you an energy that you don't like, you should know better than to say some shit like that. Just like I should know better than to fuck you up. But that's what I'm gonna do if you talk to my wife like that in that moment. So like him going, you don't talk to, that's not how you talk to a patient. Like it felt like a slap on the wrist. Like, oh, that's not what you do. Like, and yeah, I definitely felt Rachel in being upset in that moment. And then after the baby is born, Rachel starts to show signs of postpartum depression, which is always going to be difficult to watch. If you're a mother who's experienced it, if you're a mother who hasn't experienced it, it's going to be difficult to watch. And even if you're a father who's been with a woman who's experienced it, or if you've never experienced it, you could still understand how terrible that must feel and how difficult that must be to deal with. And that's when this episode really got kind of not tough to watch, but like, again, your views on Rachel and Toby start to shift a little bit at this point. She doesn't spend time with the baby at all. She often looks at it almost like with resentment, kind of. She doesn't really show any real motherly affection or mother tendency. She sees other mothers having no problem with this and gets upset seeing it, knowing that she can't do it. And like, you even kind of wonder watching it, is it like a postpartum thing? Is it she actually doesn't want to be in this situation? She'd rather be, doing her career shit and isn't really interested in being a mother. But like all of that stuff really gives you a much better idea of Rachel's perspective in that moment. So in that moment being dealing with postpartum. So when we get to this scene where where they take Hannah to the doctor and they're like, she's not smiling. I read somewhere, which that's interesting too. Like I read on the internet that they should be smiling after 6 months, 6 weeks, or whatever the fuck, right? Like that's weird to think that all babies are gonna have the exact same timeline for developmental moments. Like you should know better than that. But they take her to this doctor, and the doctor essentially says that babies can't learn to smile if you don't smile at them. And there's a great scene that Claire Danes fucking crushes where we finally see her show some sort of heart. And again, I'm not trying to shit on Rachel, but again, what we've seen of Rachel has not been great so far. So to see her break down like that, and to think that, for her to say that she thinks she's ruined her child because she can't smile at it because of the postpartum and all that kind of shit, that was a really crushing scene. And no pun intended, Claire Danes crushed it. So as Toby's career starts to take an upward trajectory, Rachel continues to struggle with essentially raising this baby alone while dealing with the postpartum. And she tells Toby that she needs help. And rather than taking the very obvious I want your help, Toby. Q from that request. Toby takes an entirely different interpretation. It goes, I agree. Let's get a nanny. I promise you that is not what Rachel was hoping to hear. But that does bring us to see how Mona came into their employment. But yeah, another time where you could see Toby dropping the ball here. Another interesting aspect of all of this, the postpartum, all that kind of stuff, is Hannah. Because, I mentioned last week that Hannah treats Toby like shit. And I'm like, Hannah is a very unlikable character. But now that we've seen the whole situation with the postpartum after her birth, it makes you wonder two things. One, is Hannah's disagreeable attitude, is that kind of like something that's like subconscious and in her DNA almost, not in a literal sense, but like from that experience while being a baby of having a mother who's not really able to show you any kind of affection. Like if you have that situation, and clearly I'm hypothesizing, I don't know any of this, but what I'm liking about this show so far and about this episode is it makes me think about this kind of stuff. Is being raised like that, or starting your life like that in a position where you don't really see your mother, and when you do, your mother is mean to you, or looks down on you, or looks at you angrily. Can that help create a child who has just like an innate resentfulness toward people? And I've always entertained the idea of like generational trauma, and this isn't generational trauma, but it is generational mindset. Like she had a negative mindset toward Toby at that time. She gives birth to this baby, and now this baby has a negative mindset toward Toby. And then I also wonder too if Hannah's shitty treatment of Toby is observational. Like is she treating him like this because she's seen Rachel do it? And then also, is there something that Toby has done or was doing, or a way that he parents that we have yet to see that is upsetting Hannah? Any of those things are all possibilities. And that makes this Hannah thing way more interesting now that she feels a little bit more complex and not just like, hey, let's write a bitch character that treats her father like shit. But like there's actually something there and something to examine. And now it makes Hannah a lot more three-dimensional. We wonder like, okay, why does she treat him like this? Like there might be a whole lot more going on here than just I'm a teenager who my dad won't let me do what all the other kids are doing. There might be a lot more there. And I think, again, these are the kinds of things that I think are making this show really compelling and not what I thought it was going to be when we were just going to get a here's how they met and here's how they broke up episode. But Toby seems to build up resentment as well. Once Rachel gets past her postpartum, she starts her own agency and finds success. And because Toby's wants to be supportive of her, and he can't do, all the extracurricular kind of shit that he would need to do to advance in his own career because he has to hurry home to relieve Mona, Toby's career starts to stall. And that's why I said at the beginning, I mentioned Libby saying that Toby was building up resentment. Like this is I think where we find out that Toby's building some sort of resentment regarding Rachel and her success and how it's kind of stalled his career. We don't see it too much. He wants to be supportive of her career, but it's unfortunately at the expense of his own career. And while Rachel continues to question his career motivations, she also insinuates he doesn't make enough money and isn't doing enough to earn more. And she's prioritizing how others will perceive her over anything else. And, all of these things are going to build up a level of resentment in Toby. She talks about having to work for everything she's done, and Toby's career being one that has a pretty clearly defined and set path. And that's always going to build up resentment too on Rachel's side of things if you see someone who is putting in a fraction of your effort but receiving equal or greater rewards. So we see like both of them building up legitimate reasons to have resentment toward the other person. We don't see too much of Toby behaving with that resentment, but we see him actually there's a moment where I think Toby it's Libby narrating that Toby thought that Rachel would harbor some sort of regret over prioritizing her career. Kind of like, Toby's like, I'm enjoying all of this time that I get to spend with my kids. And we see him constantly like putting away dinner plates because Rachel's not coming home. And he's constantly spending time with the kids, and Libby narrates that Toby thinks like, oh, she's gonna regret not having all this time with these kids, and then we see Rachel clearly not regretting this time, not regretting missing this time with these kids. And ultimately, they end up fighting over the importance of money. This is how we end the episode. There's a great line where Rachel says, "Of course, money matters," or something to that degree. Money is important, which again is incredibly fucking true. It doesn't help that it's uttered within the context of Rachel's points, because Rachel's points, her prioritization of money and perception is way too fucking high. So it kind of sucks to agree with her in that moment. But there is a level of naivete that borders on ignorance/stupidity to pretend that money doesn't matter. Like I get Toby's perspective of like he wants to do something that matters, but you can't act like money doesn't matter either. But they fight over the importance of money in front of guests. It's technically in the kitchen. And when they come back into the dinner party, the guests pretend like they were already having a conversation about who you would give a free pass to, despite hearing them argue in the kitchen, which couldn't have been a stupider or more implausible thing for them to do. Like, who would ever do, like, you hear a couple having a very serious argument because she's saying like, you wanted them to know that you cooked dinner to make me look bad, all this kind of, hey, you hear them, they're all very quiet, they hear all of this, they hear them fighting, and then they come out and somebody goes, so Rachel, who would you fuck on the side? Why would you ask that in that moment? No one would ever do that. That was completely implausible and ridiculous. But she gives the name of someone she knows in real life, Sam Rothberg, who's the same douchebag who wanted Toby to work for his pharmaceutical company, basically undermining and debunking the ideas that alternative forms of medicine can be helpful, which is something that Toby believed in. And this is an interesting turn of events because not only does Toby now hear that his wife wants to fuck a guy that she knows that he hates, but it also adds a different layer of context to Rachel wanting Toby to take that job. Because it's like, not only did Toby turn down an opportunity to make a whole lot of money at the expense of his stupid ass morals and beliefs, but he turned down her little boyfriend. So, like, there's a lot of added context there too. Maybe she wasn't dealing with Sam at the time, or well, I'm again presuming that she is dealing with Sam. We don't know that to be true, but come on. And we zoom back to present day. With present day Toby, and he comes to the realization that Sam Rothberg is probably the person who Rachel is with. So, and that's how we end the episode. So, like I said, really great episode. Once we hit the postpartum depression stuff, I thought this episode really took off. It got really emotional, and I love about this show the fact that you can look at these events that are inarguable what's happening, but have different interpretations of who's in the right, who's in the wrong, how one person should respond versus the other. And I think that's really interesting stuff. And I want to talk about that a little bit in my closing thoughts here. Because I continue to be baffled by sympathetic views of Rachel. And admittedly, this episode shows more of Toby's flaws, but Rachel still looks very much the bad guy here with her shitty worldviews. And we learn why she has shitty worldviews, but that makes the views no less shitty. And I still think there seems to be something of a gender divide. And I find that compelling to think about, the idea that we are all watching the same shit, and I as a man might be siding with Toby for subconscious man reasons, and a woman might watch the exact same thing and side with Rachel for subconscious woman reasons. And that's really interesting to me. And I don't think the show anticipated that, but I get that vibe watching the show and reading articles. So, after I finished my notes for this video, I read one article about the episode just to kind of see, like, okay, does this person's thoughts mirror mine? And the writers seem to be sympathetic toward Rachel in an overall sense, because Rachel definitely deserves sympathy as it pertains to Hannah and that doctor and the postpartum, all that kind of stuff. There's definitely should be sympathy there. But from my perspective, in an overall sense of like, I get Rachel, I don't think we've seen enough yet for there to be a sympathetic Rachel viewpoint. But there's a moment in this article where the writer says that Rachel didn't understand that the free pass was supposed to be a celebrity. And that to me read like a purposeful misreading of that scene because you want to be Team Rachel. And that scene to me read very much as intentional. They had just fought. The accusations that they were making in the kitchen were very personal. And we know that Rachel knows Toby does not like Sam. So that felt to me like an evil and petty move that was meant to hurt Toby and not a casual misunderstanding. You know, and the article I read was written by a woman, so of course that's why I would mention this gender divide on how these characters are perceived. And I think that's really interesting that, and again, you guys can let me know in the comments how you took that scene. But to me, that read is like, I'm going to say Sam Rothberg because he hurt me in the kitchen, and this is how I'm going to hurt him back. And he's sitting there looking pissed off. That's how I read the scene. So for a woman to have read the scene as, she didn't realize it was supposed to be a celebrity, big mistake. That is not how I interpret that scene. And that is not, I don't think that scene jibes with what we've seen between the two of them up to this point. And that kind of, that altered viewpoint where you see things differently because you want to side with a character that shares your gender. And I'm not accusing this writer of that. I'm just saying that if that's a thing, that's another added aspect of watching this show that I'm going to continue to find really compelling. So I've decided I'm probably going to continue covering this show. Probably is there because if this video performs as poorly as my Yellowstone video is currently doing, I'm going to stop covering this show. But if it performs the same or better than the video for episodes 1 or 2, I'm going to keep covering this show because I think examining this marriage and these two characters and how they don't fit well together and their different motivations and how we, the viewers, might differently interpret their motivations and actions is really compelling to me. So I'm going to continue covering it if you guys make it worth my while. So share this video with all your friends on your social media, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys next week for episode 4. And until then, peace.